All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us at the Educause Small College Community Groups panel, Women in Technology Leadership Journeys. My name is Penny Evans-Plants. I'm the CIO here at Berry College, the one in Georgia, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Thank you all so much for joining. We have participants from a wide range of institutions, and we also appreciate those who submitted some thoughtful questions in advance. We've tried to weave many of those questions directly into today's discussion. And we're joined today by three remarkable leaders who bring really deep experience and distinct perspectives from across higher ed technology. I'd like to begin by inviting each panelist to introduce herself briefly, your name, institution, a sentence or two about your path into technology leadership. Shannon, why don't we start with you and then move to Helen and then Tonya.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining, and thanks for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Shannon Shank, and I serve California Institute of the Arts as the AVP for Enterprise Applications in our IT organization. I've been here about 5 years, but I've spent 25 years at my former institution, having what I call grown up in the admission office and enrollment area, and then took the leap to IT, where I've served in several roles over my career. I'm a wife and a mom, and they're all grown now. So I'm settled in and looking forward to sharing with you guys today.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. And as Shannon said, thank you everyone for being here. And I'm really thrilled and honored to be included in this group. My name is Helen Norris. My institution is, well, actually, I don't have one. I retired in September 2025 after even longer than Shannon just said, working in higher ed. I worked in three different institutions. I retired from Chapman University in Southern California, where I was the CIO for 11 years. Prior to that, I worked at the California State University system at the Sacramento campus. And before that, I was at UC Berkeley, also in California. So getting used to this retirement thing. Glad to be back. I did have a technical problem with Zoom, but I was still able to fix it, so I'm happy to say that. And greetings to everybody. I'm actually in Ireland, so please forgive the kind of evening time look that we've got here. And let me turn it over to Tonya.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here today, and I'm glad to see that all of you were able to make it today. I am Tonya Bennett. I work at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine, and I am the Director of Educational Technology. And what my team covers is all of the tools for teaching and learning. So we support and help teachers teach and students learn. Which is very interesting. And I've been at Penn for 18 years. And so I started in the student affairs, student life area, and it was always about helping students. And so as I learned the technology and my role in advising and being in student life, kind of like the technology side a little bit more. So that's how I came over to be in a technology role. And I'm also a mother. I have a college student, so I'm very excited about that. And so finally, he feels my pain. So yeah, and I'm just happy to be here with all of you. I'm looking forward to our chat today.
Thank you so much.
Hold up, Amelia.
Why don't we go ahead and get started?
Here we go.
With our first question. This one is for Shannon, and it's about building influence. So, Shannon, what strategies have helped you build influence with academic and administrative partners, especially in environments where technology leadership isn't always well understood?
Okay, well, great. Thank you. I have this saying, and I've been doing this my entire career. I try really hard to make sure the right people are in the room from across the organization. I've done this my entire career as I've been on project teams or especially when I'm leading them. The approach that I take is because some of these folks have voices that are not often heard, and they should be valued. And I have found that they are now more inclined to participate and give input. Um, and so that inclusiveness allows me to be influential in helping them move forward, but it also helps the organization really feel valued when you don't just have the same people, the same leadership folks making decisions. And I got the idea actually from my former president at Mount St. Mary's. We had a strategic planning um, task force. And one of the things she said was, I want to hear voices that are not often heard. And that was extremely helpful. When we had people from help desk, we had folks from the facilities department um, to help us like brainstorm about how to lead the organization. And so I've just tried to do that in any space that I'm in. And I'm hoping that that builds the influence where needed.
Thank you. So to add on to that question, one of the questions that we got from one of the audience participants is, how do you wrangle support when you're the only woman in the room? Does that change how you lead or how you interact?
Nope. It took a while for me to get there, honestly, and I don't know if this rings true with others, but um, someone told me years ago that when I walk in the room, they sit up straighter. And that there was a huge compliment, but it really made me recognize that it doesn't like I have to be who I am. And I have to be comfortable in my own skin. I have to be comfortable with what I know. And when I walk like that, that's the influence that I think resonates because it doesn't change what I do. I don't shrink. Um, a lot of people know me. I'm not very shy. Um, but I did have to grow to that, to be honest.
Yeah, right. All right, so let's move on to question 2, which is about supporting emerging women technologists. So all 3 of our panelists will have an opportunity to respond to this question, which is, what practical steps can leaders take to support emerging women technologists and strengthen the pipeline for future women CIOs and IT leaders? And then let's build upon that, because one of the questions we got from a registrant was, how can women step into leadership and gain support from administration when opportunities are limited? So I think particularly for those of us who are at smaller institutions, this is a real problem, right? You have very limited room for mobility there. So who wants to start? Helen, would you want to start on this one? You're muted still.
Yes, if I can get off mute, I'd love to start. So, I think it's a really great question about how we can support, how leaders, and I'm going to say particularly women leaders, can support other women technologists and other women in our careers. And I have some really practical answers, but before I even give those, I want to say why I think it's important. I've heard over many years this. I'm going to use the term myth or the narrative, maybe, that women don't help each other, that we're our, quote, women are our own worst enemies. There's this syndrome, they used to call it the queen bee syndrome. A woman would get to a position of power and then she would shut the door behind her. And I just want to say that in my career, certainly I've interacted with women who've been very competitive with me and who haven't supported me, but the overwhelming number of women that I've met and worked with have been the opposite. So it's always been really important to me to beat that narrative to death. Okay, I want to get across that we are here to help each other, and we can do that in very what's the word I'm looking for? Very practical ways, Patty, as your question said. When you're in a position of influence, as I grew into positions where people would come to me for advice, or like Shannon, people would sit up straight when I walked in the room. People would ask me, who would be good to do this project, or even as a retired person, I still get questions from recruiters, calls from recruiters saying, I'm recruiting a CIO here, or whatever, do you know anyone who'd be interested? I've been on boards and been asked, do I have ideas? And I make a practice of always nominating a woman every single time. Now, that doesn't mean I don't nominate men. I do, okay? But I always nominate a woman, and I want us all to do that. Men too, right? Just be intentional about it. Just remember to say women's names and include women. I'd also like to point out that for me, I have a ton of privilege in the workplace and in life in general. So it's really critical for women who look like me to always nominate and put forward women who don't look like us. So it's always been critical to me when there's or an award of some kind, put forward the names of women of color or transgender women. It's really critical for us to do that for each other. It's so simple for us to say the name of a woman we know who wants to get ahead. And there are tons of qualified women out there for us to do that. I'm going to call out Penny and Shannon because I saw on Shannon's LinkedIn that she just got appointed to a board. And I think Penny and Carol Smith, I don't know if Carol's on this, nominated her. That's what I'm talking about. That's how you do it. Now, it's interesting. I want to call out another question, Penny, that came in before. It's where I think Tracy asked, how do we navigate with other women not in support of you? And I will say, I've been working against that narrative for so long, telling us to intentionally not be that woman. I hadn't thought about it from the other perspective. So I took a few minutes. And I think if you do find yourself in a situation where any leader, particularly a woman leader, is undermining you or not in support of you, perhaps if it's a safe enough situation, having a conversation with that person about what's going on. I remember one time early in my career, I did have a person who seemed to always want to criticize what I was doing to my boss or whatever. And one time I was able to just sit down with her and say, can we talk about this? What's going on here? What am I doing? And it was helpful. And so I think that's my response to that question.
Thank you, Helen. Tonya, if you want to go next.
Sure. Thank you. Sorry, I just had to come off of mute. But to Helen's point, she led right very nicely into what part of my response would be. And that is to nominate other women and lift other women up. Every year, it's Educause Awards times. I tap a woman on the shoulder. Hey, would you like to be nominated for an Educause Award? And I nominate men too. But I definitely make sure that I am nominating a woman or saying another woman's name because that is so important for keeping the pipeline strong and just building those relationships and supporting each other as women in technology. One practical solution that I have is to not gatekeep. And I know we all know what the term gatekeeping is, and to actually share information and knowledge, kind of like a think tank or crowdsourcing information. If you know of a good opportunity, and there's plenty out there for all of us, share with your group of women, share with your network, lift each other up. Another way is to also uh, get involved in groups like the Educause with CG, which I'm a co-lead for. And we always are looking through LinkedIn and looking through Educause articles and finding women that we've read about or heard about or want to know more about. And we go after them to get them in front of the people in our community group, because we want those role models visible, because visible role models is also a very important and very practical way, because if you can see it, you can be it, right? And so that is very important as well, just to get it out there. And then another thing is around safety, and I'll say the women under my watch, because I'm a manager, director, and I am a leader in the CG. And so I feel like creating that psychological safety is very important also for so we talked about like work-life balance and things that may disproportionately affect women than maybe their male counterparts, and just creating that space for us to talk through some of these real issues that we may feel like other people don't get. And then the last thing I will say is to partner more, co-write articles, co-write, do stuff. I'm actually, and I hope she doesn't mind sharing it, but the woman who works on my team, we're co-writing something for Educause. And I'm so excited. And I asked her, and she was like, "Yeah, I want to do it." And I'm like, "Yay!" So, I mean, look, there's so many ways and opportunities to pull other women in, or pull other women on board, or lift other women up. So those are just some of the practical ways that I can share.
Thank you, Tonya. Shannon, do you want to close us out on that question?
Yeah, my my friends here have said so much, and I agree with all of it. And what I wrote in my notes was look for them, go find them. And then, as a leader, in my career, I've had supervisor roles, and I stretch those women on my team. A lot of them have been sort of introverts. I am the opposite of that. I am very aware that they're not going to raise their hand, right? But I don't want to force them to do it, but I want to encourage them that they can. And um, so I do. I stretch them a little bit. I put them in places where they haven't been before. I call on them in a meeting first, or something like that. Or instead of me, when I'm running the meeting, um, talking all the time, I let them speak and they give their input, or I've asked them to take charge of a particular project or a part of a project so that their voice is heard. Um, and then I send them to meetings without me. That's a big deal. And they're like, but you can go. You already know. And so then that helps them get out there instead of them just seeing Shannon Shank all the time. And, this is coming from someone that works with her. So that's the other ways that I've tried to um, take some practical steps.
Thank you, ladies. That was great. All right, so moving to question 3, which is around mentorship and sponsorship. And this one is going to go to Tonya and Shannon. So, who has played a critical mentorship or sponsorship role in your career, and how do you approach mentoring others? Which I know you all have already somewhat touched on the mentoring aspect, but if there are things you could add, that would be helpful. So,
I'll
Tonya, why don't you?
start.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Shannon. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to call out Helen because She is not officially my mentor, but she is mentor adjacent, and she has done it for as long as I've known her, which has been quite a long time. So she's a really great example of somebody who's done it, and she did it for me twice. So she nominated me for the Outstanding Executive in Technology Award that was sponsored by the Advancing Women in Technology in California. And she sat with me at the table and she encouraged me and she clapped really loudly. It was really great. And my CIO at the time actually came to support me on that evening, along with my husband. And then, Helen, I don't know if you remember this, but that women's leadership program that was put on by UCLA, Helen mentioned that to me before, and that was for women seeking a CIO role, and it was free. And I spent October of 2019 to March 2020 in this transformational program, which gave me the confidence to keep growing. And to be honest, I walked in that room thinking it was just higher education folks who wanted to lead. And I found that it was across all industries, entertainment, banking. And then I shrunk a little bit, to be honest, you guys. I was sitting next to a senior vice president of something or another. Her name was Joanna. I'll never forget her. She became one of my very good friends. We're still connected today. And she said, and I said, "Oh, well, what do you do?" And she started talking, and it was a little bit bigger than me because I was the senior director of enterprise apps at my tiny little school in California. And she said, "Well, what do you do?" And I told her, and she goes, "How do you run a college?" And I said, "Oh, it's like running a small city. You just did, 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 did." And she was like, "Wow." And then I said, "I belong here." It was like that, aha, it's okay. And it really helped me to seek out other learning opportunities. And it also helped me think about what Helen did and how I was able to mentor some others in my organization after that.
Uh,
So,
Penny, can I add something to that?
Of course.
I don't think of myself as a mentor, so Shannon, I really appreciate those comments. But I will say that, and this maybe gets back to how can we empower women in technology to step in leadership positions. We're all here to help each other. And if anybody in this room emailed me and asked for a meeting, I would do it. I would do it if I was still working, when I was busy. I have time now, But I think that's true for every woman on this panel, every woman in this room. First of all, I'm just flattered to be asked for advice. I just think like, wow, okay, I must be something. And so when you reach out and ask someone to mentor you or to give you some advice, you're really helping them. And so I just want to kind of add on to what Shannon said about that.
Thank you. Tonya, do you want to add anything?
I'll add that I've been fortunate, very, very fortunate to have so many mentors and so many very amazing, strong people pour into me that if I started listing them, we'd be here all day, maybe even tomorrow. But what I will say about just mentoring relationships and mentoring in general is really use the people you have available to you. Like, this is a resource that you can tap in and you could use. At first, I was like maybe a little skittish, like, I don't want to. No, do it. Do it. Reach out, bug us, email us, ask us questions, ask me to nominate you for a thing. If you see a thing, if you want to go for something, if you need a cheerleader, if you need to cry, if you need to vent, like really, really use your mentors that way. And what I learned about mentoring relationships in general, like I did a mentoring circle, which I've never done that before. And I was in there as a mentor, but I was being mentored too as well. Like, so the relationship was reciprocal. So I actually get something out of helping others, and it actually does help me to grow as well. And so that's one thing that I will say about mentoring relationships is definitely take advantage of them, especially if someone places themselves in your life as a mentor. Definitely just swing for the fences and really use all. You wouldn't believe how many times I've bugged my mentors about random stuff and been like, hey, I saw this job. Do you know this person? And can you send them an email to just tell them that I'm okay and vouch for me? Like, yeah. And then you move on. But it is really a very wonderful resource. And I wish more people would really like take full advantage to the people in their circles and that they have available to them.
Thank you. That was great. All right, so moving on, talking about navigating bias. So Helen is going to tackle this one. How have you navigated subtle or overt bias in your career, and what advice would you give to others experiencing similar challenges?
So, I've been around a long time. I go back to the 1980s. I've I've seen things. I could tell some stories, but we won't. I'll tell a couple. But yes, there is a lot of bias, and I've experienced it. And most bias, I think, is really what we think of as an unconscious bias. So the person, I think, just doesn't even realize that they have the bias. And the bias that I experienced most often throughout my career. I work in IT, but people always assumed, you're just not that technical. I've had people say that to me, and I've had people say, well, women aren't that technical. And, I don't know, but, I've got a degree in math, and I was a certified netware engineer back in the day. I'm pretty technical. And when I was younger, when I would get that kind of like, well, you're not that technical, sometimes it would really make me mad. And I will say I often didn't handle it maybe as well as I should have. But over the years, I think the thing that I've learned that the best way to deal with bias is first kind of arm yourself. I think the reason I reacted badly to it is because in my head, I was like, well, they shouldn't be thinking that. Okay, well, that's not actually helpful, right? If I walk into a room and I know that most people aren't going to look at me and see, a highly technical person. By the way, if you're a good communicator, people are going to assume you're not a good technical person. Those two things are not actually mutually exclusive, but whatever. So I know going into a room that now that I'm older too, people probably think I have no technical skills at all. And so being able to give gentle hints that you have the skill that the person maybe assumes you don't. I will tell you a story. A few years ago, I was actually at a party. I was speaking with a person who's a CIO at another university, and we were talking, and he was like, "Oh, and I always say to people who are maybe I wasn't a CIO at the time. He was like, don't ever be the technical support in the room because, you'll get," and I was like, you know what? I'm going to tell you that's a more nuanced conversation for a woman because I'll be in a room and there'll be an issue with the AV and people will look at every other man in the room before they will look at me. They'd look at my husband. I've had that happen to see if he could fix the technical problem. So sometimes I would actually advise a female CIO to be the technical support for your president. And go fix the AV problem when it's in the room because people are assuming if you know that people are assuming a certain thing about you. And you can take that further because people have unconscious biases about people for all kinds of reasons. I'm from Ireland. The bias that people have about us is actually really pretty positive. People think we're really nice, and they think we're funny and fun to be around, which we are, or which at least I am. But, people don't necessarily assume that we're strong financial and budget people, for example. And so, I know that the bias that maybe people don't have, or you know what I'm trying to say. I know that people aren't assuming I'm technical when I walk in a room, assuming quite the opposite. They're not necessarily assuming that I understand a lot about how to manage in an American environment. And I try to put those skills on display ahead of the skills that people assume I've got, being nice and being friendly, because they already are making that assumption about me.
Thank you. That was very interesting. And I know you have, I'm sure, very lots and lots of stories
Oh my goodness.
to tell over your career about all the things that have happened. I know, to your point, I know I was in a meeting with a vendor, and they assumed I didn't know some very basic technical concept. I can't even remember what it is now. And I was with one of my male colleagues, and he was actually just appalled that they would assume that. But
or
it
or the
happened.
other one you get, Penny, which I'm sure you get, and I'm sure Shannon and Tonya have gotten it too, is people, you'll be with your colleague, maybe a person who reports to you, a man who reports to you, and people will assume that they're the boss.
It's the opposite.
That's an interesting one, and that's actually really embarrassing for your colleague too. So I think try to remind ourselves even not to make those assumptions.
That's right. All right, so we're going to stick with Helen for a minute. Although I think Shannon has already touched on this one about building inclusive teams. So, what practices have you found most effective in creating inclusive team cultures where women and underrepresented colleagues can thrive?
Well, again, I would lean into the intentionality of bringing a, a, a a group together that brings different voices. I like what Shannon told me. She said she learned from her president in strategic planning, for instance, bring in voices that you don't usually hear. So I think the key is to be intentional. It's also important to make it safe for people to speak up in a way that might not be the way other people are speaking, or saying something that is maybe from a different perspective than other people in the room. You asked earlier, Penny, with Shannon, what's it like when you're the only woman in the room? Do you behave differently? And I think in my life, Shannon, I probably have, but I think the critical thing, however, is to not be the only woman in the room, because it really is lonely to be the only woman in the room, or it can be very lonely. And so, again, I'm a person with privilege. So I feel the same way about maybe women of color. If you're the only woman of color in the room, I can't even imagine how much lonelier it is than it is for me. So trying to ensure that you minimize situations where a person is the only, I think can be very, very helpful to creating a more welcoming workspace. I know that's harder in a smaller organization. And, that's why I think it's helpful for us to reach outside our own organizations and have networks. Why Educause, I think, is so important, because we can bring in people with we can find different ways to support people, because we just have a bigger pool with which to do that.
Great. Tonya or Shannon, did you have anything you wanted to add about inclusive teams?
No, I'm good. Yeah, Helen said it perfectly.
All right, well, let's move to advice for earlier career women. So we have a number of women on the call who are early in their careers. And the question for the panelists is, if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self or other early career women in tech today, what would it be and why? And then let's add on to that a question that we had from one of our registrants. So what recommendations do you have for an experienced professional starting out, and what pitfalls should they watch out for? So do we want to start with Tonya?
Sure, I can start. So I'm going to be very, very candid and honest. I had so much trouble with this question because I can't give just one piece of advice. So if you ever ask me for advice, you're not going to get one piece of advice. I'm sorry. I don't think my brain does that. In saying that, I have a couple of pieces of advice, and one is build your network, work on your network. So that's the one thing that when my younger career me, I wish I would have known. Also, build resilience to bias and gatekeeping, because that has weathered me through some storms as well during my career. And just one more, I promise. And it is to focus and try to focus your energy on impact projects or things that are making an impact.
I think that's a really great point, and something that I have recommended to women as well is, if you haven't been assigned to a project that is something you're very interested in, you can volunteer to be a part of the project. Um, Try to resist, volunteering to take notes. I don't think that's necessarily the role you want, but to be a part of the project and to be able to contribute. And then you start getting that recognition, and particularly in areas where you have expertise. So, I noticed that we had a number of women on here who are in instructional design. So, if you know your particular LMS or some particular skill related to that very well, then start doing, presentations. You're probably already doing those presentations on your campus for faculty and others. So then you can start doing presentations for your local, state organizations or other professional organizations you're a member of, like Educause, things like that. And so, like Tonya says, that then can help you build your network really well and be very supportive.
Penny, could I add one more thing?
Of
Because I
course.
realized I didn't quite address the second part of the question that was submitted.
Yeah.
One of the things for career changers or the person who's been in the career is really apply your transferable skills. So you've been in an industry for 25 years and you probably amassed so many like communication skills and project management skills, and all of these skills are relatable and transferable into being an IT analyst. So I would challenge you to identify what those skills are and really harness them as you build your career as an analyst.
That's awesome. Shannon?
Yeah, I'll add, let's see. Well, always be willing to learn. I know that sounds really cliche, but sometimes we shy away from it and just kind of settle on what we know. So I've actually, to be very transparent, had to push myself to continue to learn. And I'm a woman of a certain age these days, and these young folks know a whole lot of stuff, and I want to make sure that I know what's happening. To continue to grow my organization and my team. I'm a big proponent on building your network. It's huge. I have been able to tap into my network multiple times over my career. A very quick story. Our accounts payable team walked out on the job at one point, and one person was like, I'm supporting them, and da 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 da. It wasn't the 50 people, it was like three. But it crippled the department. And someone called me from their area and said, Shannon, can you give us a crash course in how to process? And I said, huh, that may somebody who's smarter than me. I say that all the time. So I called one of my CIO friends who was using the same student information system that I was. Well, I wrote an email and he called me. He said, I could tell from the words that you're in a bit of a panic right now. And he got somebody on the phone for us that afternoon. They did a crash course with them and we were able to get it done. But it literally was a phone call. And I hear a lot when Shannon calls me, I pick up the phone because I've established a relationship with them. And I do the same for them if they needed to. So I'm a huge proponent of having a really strong network. But I also think about I want to share like you should never let anyone else's limited perspective define your trajectory. You deserve to be in every room that you're in because your voice adds value there. And I it's sort of like how I got into IT. I volunteered for the project, and we were going from that green box thing to a real computer and student information system. And at that time, I was the office manager in the admission office, and I was over the student workers. And so my boss, who was the director, he says, "I'm going to the colleague, project meeting." And I said, "Can I go?" And he said, "You want to go to that?" And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Are you going to train the student workers on how to use the new system?" He said, "Nope." He said, "Come on." Because it wasn't just about learning or knowing it, it was understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing so that I can impart that to my students. And then I can run data to see if they're doing it right, because the data at the very beginning is going to affect their entire matriculation at the Institute. So I was really glad that I raised my hand there and I learned so much. And now I'm stuck on the dark side, as they say, but I love it here. That's all I
That's
have.
great. Thank you. So I'm gonna change things up just a little bit and ask a question that we hadn't really talked about before, or change it just a little. So, we had talked about the things, that have made a difference and things that we've done, but what did we not do that we wish that we had, or what would we have done differently if we know now what we did, if we knew then what we know now? Um, and now I'm putting them all on the spot for something they weren't prepared for.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Penny, because I think it kind of goes along with the last question. I think, what advice would you give people, I think it's probably natural as you get older, you get more self-confidence and, but I wish when I was younger that maybe I'd taken more risks, right? I think in order to move ahead, you have to get out of your comfort zone. You got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And for me, it's very uncomfortable to ask for help, right? And so I think early in my career, I didn't do what I kind of try to beat onto people today is, call me, ask me for help, but like Shannon said, volunteer to be on the project that is not in your area, and do those uncomfortable things that might feel a little uncomfortable. That's where the magic learning is when you're doing something that's just not your everyday, or not something that you're excited about, or well, you're excited about it but may not know about it. I think the other thing that gets a little bit easier as you get older is calling out some bad behavior. And it's important, you always hear be a good ally, and when you see something, take care of it. And that I wish I'd done a lot more of when I was younger, and I maybe done a bit more gracefully. And so, I think what's interesting is if somebody makes a mistake and you handle it well. I'll give you an example. I had a person who I was in a meeting with him, and he made a comment about a female coworker who was she was having a baby, and actually used the phrase, if she comes back from having her baby. And I was like, in my head. Later, I called him and I was like, I just don't know why. I don't think it's appropriate for you to say that in a workplace. If a man was out on disability because of an illness and pregnancy, he's supposed to be treated the same as that. And he just appreciated me bringing it to his attention. And so, I wish I had done a little bit more of that when I was younger. But I found it scary, right? I found it scary to tell a person that, he had really kind of offended me and probably a lot of women in the room. But I at least had the common sense to do it in a way that was really respectful to him. And we both learned from it.
I think it can be harder when you are younger or newer in your career to do something like that. And I think it can be helpful to do it privately, like you said, to call them separately rather than do it in a meeting. Of course, it depends on what the situation is, right? Sometimes you do need to speak up in the meeting rather than be silent, but that can be very, very hard to do. So we have a few minutes, and I don't believe we got any questions in the chat. But if you have questions, please come off mute and ask our panelists. We would love to hear from you.
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you all for sharing. It's inspirational, and I'm glad we have this opportunity to put it out there. I think a lot of times as senior leaders, we can feel very lonely, and we're sitting in these seats, and we don't really have places to be able to vent. Obviously, we can't talk to our direct reports necessarily about some of these things. So it's great to be able to have peers that we can share with. So thank you for sharing your stories.
Yes. And I want to thank Shannon, Helen, Tonya for such really thoughtful and candid insights today. Your experiences, your perspectives, they really highlight the challenges that women in technology are continuing to navigate, but also the creativity, our resilience, and leadership that women are bringing to our institutions. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. They helped add a lot of depth to today's discussion. We really encourage you to stay connected through your Educause community groups, whether it's a small college group, the Women in Technology group that Tonya is a co-leader of, or there's, I'm sure you're aware, there are many different community groups in Educause that you could belong to and be a part of and contribute to. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope
I just wanted to lift up one question from Janae.
Okay, awesome.
I think Tonya mentioned a mentorship circle. Does anyone have recommendations for group mentorship programs?
For group mentorship programs?
Yeah.
Baron, did you have?
Yeah, I typed an answer in there. I don't know, Janae, if you're at a NERCOMP institution, but we developed both in one-to-one and small group mentorship programs, and it's curated by the NERCOMP staff. It's volunteers on both sides. So any of you can and should be mentors, and any of you can and should be mentees. And I've done one-on-one and I've done the small group, and the small group is a really interesting thing because what you really want to do is have it be everybody mentoring each other. Educause also has a mentorship portal that focuses more on the one-to-one, but both of those are available. And as long as I've got the mic, I thought it was very humble of you, Helen, to say that you don't see yourself as a mentor, but you've been a mentor to me as well, serving with you, watching what you do, learning from the way you approach situations, seeing you as the chair of the Educause board and representing us across the country. It's inspirational. So I just want to thank you.
I was thinking too, Baron. I wonder how many people Helen has mentored over her career.
Well, I am pretty old. No, I've been around a lot.
Well, actually,
I,
that program that Helen put me in contact with, she was also a presenter. We had different presenters come in to
Yeah.
discuss different topics about leading an IT
yeah.
organization, and Helen was one of our speakers too there. So she's not just a mentor in higher ed. I'm pretty sure she mentored some people because as part of that program, you got a mentor at the end. My mentor happened to be the CIO at Trader Joe's that I still talk to today.
Wow. Yeah.
Cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great program. And I will say one thing about mentorship. Um, Sometimes you start a relationship and it doesn't work, right? Just for some reason, you just don't click. That's okay. And I think it should be okay to just say, you know what, or to respectfully kind of back out of the relationship, either as the mentor or the mentee, because sometimes it doesn't work because of timing or other things. But I have had the experience where I think I was the wrong mentor for a person in a very formal program, and that's probably why I don't think of myself as a mentor, because I think we both felt the need to back out. So.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, shoot. I had a slide. Thank you, Tonya. I completely forgot to show our contact information, which I can do really quickly if you need email address and LinkedIn information, which I know you can search for everyone on LinkedIn, but here's our email addresses if you want to reach out afterwards. So again, thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much.
It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you, ladies.